All right, it looks like we're live on the Bitcoin Bottom Line. We have a live edition with Stephen and CJ and friends. Welcome, everyone.
All the friends are here.
All of them. We only have 5.
We have
friends, but that's all you
we
need.
have Bitcoin luminaries, we have miners, we have devs, we have
Chairman of soccer teams.
Football club chairman. We have key experts. So on privacy and whatnot. So where do we even get started, Stephen? This is cool. We got everybody at the same time.
Well, I'm just very excited to have all of these folks here joining us as we kick off the new year, and we talk about. I think we should talk about what this year is going to bring us.
I think we could do a roundtable on that. But I would say that one of the first things is a new year always brings optimism, right? Last year, 2021 was all-time highs. It was all-time terrible flood attacks. It was adoption from a country, right, for Bitcoin. So does 2022 mean there's going to be more countries adopting, or we're going to have 2 countries adopt, 3 countries adopt? We got a football club now that's officially a Bitcoin football club. We got all kinds of action with mining hitting all-time highs already with hash rate. So I guess we could do a roundtable and go through everybody and say what they think is going to be the biggest story of 2022. So let's start with Justine. She's at the top. So we'll go.
Oh man, so much pressure. First, thanks for having me here. I was expecting like friends in quotations there, but yeah, thanks so much for having me here. Man, it has been an insane year. I think when I'm considering 2022 and what's going to happen and what may or may not happen in big news, I think that Jack from Strike are like, they're making waves everywhere. So I kind of think adoption will be sort of a main focus. We've already seen some big institutions adopting Bitcoin, but what does it look like from a usability standpoint, from a user standpoint? How many hands can we get, those Bitcoin wallets into in an easy to use way? So I think of adoption in that way. And perhaps it's the year that Bitcoin finally doesn't die. It's dead, currently at whatever it is right now, dies constantly. But I think that with each year, it sort of gets a little bit right? I can't talk anymore. It becomes less dead, we'll say, that people are sort of accepting it in one way, shape, or another. I don't know, though. What does 2022 bring? I don't know. I think user adoption, what that looks like, who knows? I'm a big fan of getting keys in everybody's hands. So I'm going to say that it's the year that people start holding their keys and understand why. And perhaps there's a big news story having to do with that. Who knows?
I love it. Well, let's talk about hash rates a little bit. Pass it over to Christy Lee. Talk about some mining.
2022 is going to bring, finally, hopefully, Intel ASICs. That is what is going to roll out this year. I believe that this is finally going to be the year we see some of the mainstream guys get into the ASIC development business, because Bitcoin has become big enough. In 2018, 2019, the statement was always, look, this Bitcoin thing, it's just not a big enough market cap. Like, yes, we see adoption, but we want to be selling into the multi-billion-dollar business. And it wasn't big enough back then. And with the China ban, all of the hash rate, all of the mining has moved to the US. We've started to become a little saturated, and it's perfect for some of the big mainstream guys. So I think that is going to happen. And in partnership with that, having someone like Intel, someone like even TSMC producing their own in-house ASICs and marketing it through a partner like Avnet, that will end up giving enough comfort for some of the bigger companies to start fully accepting Bitcoin as a payment solution. So it will have this domino effect of adoption within kind of the enterprise players for Bitcoin as a payment solution. So that is my guess this year. And I can guarantee you that some of the bigger guys will probably want to beat Jack and Square or Block or whatever they're called now to the punch with kind of claiming the title for the first US-based ASIC development.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. As someone that's getting heavier and heavier into mining myself, As I'm seeing my petahashes grow, I'm very interested to see if there's going to be a supply chain thing where I can get American ASICs as opposed to having to order from China or Malaysia or wherever they're coming from now. But I think the real big question is like how much, what do you think the appetite really is for ASIC absorption from the industry itself? Because as we see the chips get more, efficient and stuff like that, and the miners themselves are getting more power efficient. Do you think that we're going to ever level off, or it's just going to be like Michael Saylor says, and hash rate's going to go up forever?
Correct. Hash rate, like the cap of hash rate is going to be your infrastructure, right? Like how much power you have available on the grid, how much data centers you have built out. But yeah, as long as there's power to fill and miners can keep making profit, they are going to keep buying. That's the entire beauty of proof of work. I mean, that infrastructure is Bitcoin's economic sink. It's gold sink.
Yeah.
And I don't think the supply chain is going to get any better. Like just because we get American ASICs, that doesn't actually fix all of the supply chain issues. We're still competing for the same resource, but it will mean that kind of public companies can take that, market it. It's good marketing to advertise, hey, we use, Freedom hardware. Yay.
All right. Well, maybe we'll pass it on to Charlie. The last time Charlie was on, we talked about how you would take duffel bags full of cash to Starbucks in the early days to buy Bitcoin from people you met on the internet. And how are people going to get access to Bitcoin in 2022?
Well, first of all, it wasn't duffel bags of cash. It was at most like a few $1,000s, but still.
It sounds way cooler that way.
It's the image, right? 2022. I think adoption will be big, right? So even like Bitcoin as legal tender. I think just today I heard Tonga was interested in making Bitcoin legal tender and follow El Salvador's plan, which is very exciting. I think more and more countries will actually do that. And yeah, the work Strike is doing is pretty impressive in all these countries. I do think a spot ETF may possibly happen. Crossing my fingers. I think that would be huge if it does. And one thing about like price, I have a feeling we're not going to see like another like four-year cycle. I think we're going to see like more stability. So price may see another all-time high this year. It won't be like, my gut is that it won't be like before where we see like an 80% drop and then wait another 3 years before all-time high. I think the price will just slowly keep going up because of all this new adoption. So I'm hopeful about that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think the question is there a recipe for the legal tender situation, right? Because Tonga has a huge amount of remittances. They don't have that many people there, but they have a lot of Tongans that are living internationally at like all these different places, whether it's Australia or New Zealand or, different places around the world. So it seems to me that the recipe for the legal tender adoption is really like, do you have a lot of exported citizens that are basically living in other places? Do you have a diaspora that's out there? And then do you have a small enough economy that it can actually, that itself makes an impact, And as we see these small countries adopt, eventually the big country, there's going to be a big country that adopts it at some point. You have to think that they're going to be the finding way. I still think Stephen and I had an episode about this where I still think Panama would be the best one for a lot of reasons, but we'll see what happens. But I'm super interested with that. And the Strike going into Argentina is definitely a good first step as well. So Peter, let's find out what's happening with the Bedford Bitcoin Football Club. What's going on out there in the UK? Tell us what the big benchmarks for 2022 are for you.
So we got a big game tomorrow. We're playing top of the table, which is exciting. No real benchmarks for this season. We've only got half a season left. If we can get promoted, great. But I've kind of told my whole team everything starts for us in August when the next season starts. So like if we don't make promotion this year, it's fine. We're focused on next season anyway. The benchmarks for me are just commercial revenue, proving that by having like an international base of Bitcoiners who support this team, that we can have a revenue model which matches league clubs in the UK, and then just building out the club, building up the infrastructure of the club, the processes, the protocols, trying to make this like a proper team, taking a 10th division team up through the leagues. I don't know. In some ways, I'm kind of hoping for a boring year in Bitcoin. I think get a lot more done when it's boring. I've got a lot of stuff to do. I've got a lot of work to do with the football club and with the podcast. I'd be quite happy with a boring year with a price that doesn't go up too high, doesn't drop too much, is quite steady. We get on and build things. And I'm most looking forward to seeing how all these projects that Jack Dorsey's been talking about, seeing the kind of like the meat on the bones of there. There's so many different things they've been talking about, hardware wallets and mining and blue sky and yada yada. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they turn out. And then I'm kind of hoping that the all the legal situations that many people are involved in Bitcoin, I feel like this is a year that kind of all collapses and the people involved in bringing those lawsuits disappear and no longer have an influence over the people out there trying to build out Bitcoin projects.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It seems to me also that I've seen a lot of footballers around the world start adopting Bitcoin, particularly to get payment in them. Not just footballers from the soccer sense, because we're American over here, but also even football players. American football in the U.S., baseball players. It's absolutely crazy what we're seeing. I was at a hockey game, the Nashville Predators hockey game Tuesday night, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I've been watching your Bitcoin podcast." It's like, wait, we get like, maybe 50 people watching it. Like, I mean, that's crazy. But it's somebody that worked for the organization. And what's nuts is all these athletes are really getting into the game and starting to watch it. And I think it's fantastic that you've launched a Bitcoin football league. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I really wish that I had the opportunity to take some paychecks in Bitcoin back in the day. That would have been a much better use of my capital than spending money on cars and stuff.
CJ, you would be like the whale of all whales if you got paid in Bitcoin in 2012 or whatever it was. That would have been insane.
Yeah, I would have been. If I would have just taken, I've done the, it's like everybody does the math on this. They've all bought something stupid like from 2011 to 2014, and you're like, oh, if I would have just taken a little bit of money from this other thing or that other thing and put it into Bitcoin. But yeah,
CJ,
I wish I knew
since my son was born in 2004, every month I've got a bank account with a direct debit that's got £50 going into it since 2004. If in 2009 I'd have flipped that to Bitcoin, he'd be a billionaire.
I mean, CJ, just imagine your Head and Shoulders commercials proceeds. I mean, when you were a model, that putting that in Bitcoin would have done it.
I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen. That's like a really
you did Head and Shoulders? I didn't know this. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna have to go look this up on YouTube.
Oh yeah, it's good.
I like to bring up embarrassing things about you. It's fun.
So speaking of fun stuff, so Jimmy, other than switching your backgrounds around, what do you think is going on for 2022? You've been busy already with we obviously wrote the book together, have the book launch coming out. Is this 3 books in 3 years for you? It's
4 books in 4 years. Yeah. So including my first one, Programming Bitcoin. But yeah, it's, I want to do a book every year, but as far as Bitcoin is concerned, I think the topic that we wrote about is going to be the big thing this year. I expect a lot more pushback from the people that hate it. Including like the ESG narrative and all that stuff. I expect that to blow up even more, despite the fact that we've debunked it like 500 times, but that hasn't stopped like altcoins or whatever. So like that sort of thing happens all the time. I expect this year to be a lot of fighting about that, especially as we go towards sort of the election season and people arguing about it. I think this will be sort of like the first U.S. election cycle where Bitcoin will like not necessarily be a major issue, but it'll be there as an issue. Like I'm looking at like the Ohio Senate race, for example. There are 5 candidates, 2 Democrats, 3 Republicans. All of them have said something good about Bitcoin. They do not want to get on our bad side at this point. So I see that becoming a bigger part. Like price action, who the heck knows? I think a lot of people are a little bit disillusioned after the whole Plan B thing. So there's some of that recovery. I think that's going to happen, and we're going to have to figure out, okay, what is like a fair price for Bitcoin, and go from there. There's still, like a lot of inflation happening. So I expect that to still sort of like work its way through the economy. I do think that the Fed will try to tighten a little bit, but I don't think they'll be able to, because there are too many financial forces that, like they'll ruin everything if they stop printing, right, or raise interest rates or whatever. There are just too many sort of like dominoes that would fall as a result of those sort of actions. So I expect all of that ultimately to be good for Bitcoin, as we usually say in this space. This is good for Bitcoin, and I think we'll see that in every which way this year. And we're gonna go run up against some adversity, but these are the times when Bitcoin does well, is when we face up to something, defeat the level boss, and then we level up. I don't know if we really had a level boss that we beat in 2021, but 2022, I'm optimistic that we'll get to defeat one of those.
One of the things that no one's brought up yet is the news that just came out that Rio de Janeiro is going to add Bitcoin to 1% of its city treasury. So Miami has already put a certain amount of Bitcoin in its treasury. So you've got Miami and Rio de Janeiro as now 2 competing forces to be Bitcoin City. Who do you think is going to win?
El Salvador. El Salvador is going to win, because they already have more Bitcoin infrastructure going on there, and they're way more committed. I think the funny thing to me is I think as more municipal districts get into Bitcoin, it just pushes that game theory where El Salvador got in early, and you have Bukele sitting there like in his underwear, like buying the dip and then roasting economists. You know what I mean? And he's just like, his stack is going to get more and more valuable as they go, especially because they're mining. And I think that's really the key. I don't really know how many ASICs they have, or how much power they have from that from the geothermal vent that they're mining from, but I do think that they're going to be the ones that really they're going to win. I think the only thing about the Rio thing is I think they're going to do their own coin, like Miami coin. So I'm a little bit skeptical of that. But like Jimmy said, the real thing is, like, as the narrative changes every year, right? There's a level boss or something like that. And maybe last year we didn't necessarily defeat a new level boss, but we added power-ups. If you think about like Bitcoin as a video game character, we added these super boosters. We had Sailor and Tesla and all these other people that it came out. What's the guy? Bill Miller the other day. Or is that his name, Steven? The guy that announced that he's 50% in Bitcoin and 50% in Amazon. Like, that's all his holdings.
Same.
So you're going to have this narrative where you're going to check the box where more people are worried about inflation. So they're going to seek that pressure that they're feeling now is going to cause them to look around for a better landing spot for their money or their investment, like Jimmy said. And then I think that all the municipal districts are going to sit there like Gary Leland, the Bitcoin boomer, actually made a contact with somebody from a state Senate office that is looking to add Bitcoin to their treasury. So a couple of the people from the Bitcoin Today coalition are going to go meet with them next week. So that's interesting. I mean, the more that stuff it's happening, right? It's like the Ron Paul, the GIF. It's happening. It's really happening. It's just happening more and more often, So I think the more educated the public gets, the more they're going to look around and go like, wait a second, what system am I in right now? Like, what is this crappy matrix of money that we're trapped by? And I think that macro argument is going to get a lot of people in, because they do understand that. They can feel that. That's tangible. That the burger prices are up, the milk prices are up, the gas prices are up.
Yeah.
CJ, you don't think that China was last year's level boss. I mean, for years people have been saying this, right? Like, oh, Bitcoin, it's just centralized in China, blah blah blah. That has always been a common argument about why Bitcoin is a fraud, especially here in the US. And then that problem solved overnight.
Yeah, I think the only thing with that is China kind of jumped on their own sword there. They're the ones that banned Bitcoin themselves, so they're banned mining themselves. So they kind of helped out the cause in that sense by basically removing that huge piece of FUD, which was that China has centralized the mining. So by taking that out of the mix, I think things came together a little bit. But that is a good point. I think that like the narrative with FUD does not have to be accurate. Like, so it just only has to be a detriment, so it's really everything that someone says that's negative about Bitcoin has only had the effect of like adding weight to a sled behind Bitcoin. Bitcoin's just dragging all these things up the hill, up and to the right on the chart, no matter what. And China is like, I mean, obviously they're not really like super into freedom for their citizens. So that's something that I think would be definitely part of the narrative for sure.
What do we think of the El Salvador Pegasus thing? Do we think that is a FUD, or is that probably smells like it could be true? And does anyone worry that?
What are you talking about? Sorry, can you review what the Pegasus is?
So it was revealed that something like 30 activists and journalists in El Salvador's phones were infected with the Pegasus software, which is the kind of like state tracking software that has been used to track people. So it's not the healthiest optics for El Salvador, but at the same time, probably most governments are using it, which is not to excuse it. But at the same time, it does exist. And we do have a number of things that happened in El Salvador over the last 18 months that feel very authoritarian, which is, I mean, something that Bitcoiners generally are against. Does anyone feel like, as Bitcoiners, are we being objective enough about El Salvador? Are we giving them a free ride because they're Bitcoiners, when really if it was Erdogan doing this, we would like, oh, fuck this is terrible. I feel like myself as a Bitcoiner, I feel conflicted and challenged with this. I'd be interested to know what anyone else thinks.
Well, with the Pegasus spyware, I mean, you could easily verify their contracts. Up until 2019, that the NSO group was actually, I think it was running as a subsidiary of an American venture capital firm. So NSO group creates this Pegasus spyware. But I think you hit on a really important point. I do think as Bitcoiners, there's been a trend I've seen, especially as it's moved more into America, where we tend to give people a pass just because they're in the Bitcoin community. And we just get so excited. And I feel like that did happen with El Salvador. And people are just like, oh my God, El Salvador is adopting Bitcoin, but they're not paying attention to everything else that is happening. And yeah, I do think the Pegasus spyware is really real. And for people that aren't aware, there was a report last year that over 30% of the iOS population had Pegasus spyware installed on it. It was active up until iOS 14.2, I think. I'm probably scaring people with how much I know about this random piece of spyware.
Well, I mean, what you're pointing out is absolutely correct, though, right? Like, it's not just El Salvador. It's every tech company has way more information than they should. And I get the like concern about El Salvador, but to me, like, a lot of the criticism is like from people that like had no problems with it until it's like, oh, okay, well, El Salvador is doing it and they're throwing shade at Bitcoin. It's like, okay,
I don't think that's true,
Vitalik
Jimmy.
Buterin had no concerns about legal tender laws until El Salvador adopted it as Bitcoin. Now he's suddenly like, oh, I'm all pro, liberty, and they shouldn't force people to take a certain currency and all that stuff. I like you said, like Pegasus is like a very big thing, and every tech company has way more information than the El Salvadorian government ever will. Like just like by orders of magnitude on not just the people, like just a small subset of journalists in El Salvador, but pretty much like everyone around the world that has a cell phone. Like this is not a small amount of data. And we don't, like, nobody talks about that. If you really were concerned about that particular thing, then you would have objected to all of that for years instead of now bringing it up. Oh, okay, well, El Salvador, let's throw some shade at Bitcoin. I feel like it's like,
are we talking about the same thing here, Jimmy? Are we talking about tracking data versus access to your private communications? Because I don't think tech companies have those access to your private communications.
Oh, of course they do. It's on their servers.
Yeah, but the ones that create the software, but it's not like Airbnb can go into my WhatsApp messages.
No, but Google can go into your phone, and Apple can go into your phone. Like that's been true forever.
Yeah, and
I think there's a slight difference when it's like a government going into the private messages of journalists and activists versus Google, which is a commercial operator trying to sell products on the base of it. I'm not saying that both. I'm saying both wrong, but I think they're different things, and I think comparing the two is slightly risky.
I really think they're the same thing. Like Google and Apple,
is
they're
Google
as
arresting
much
journalists?
Overlords over us as the government is over us.
But is Google? But Google will never put journalists in jail. I mean, if you look at Erdogan in Turkey, where he imprisons journalists who are critical of him, and that is something that happens with autocratic regimes, and it's something that's a threat. And that's
no, but they'll
risk.
Cooperate with governments and give them whatever info they want without any like warrants or whatever. Like that happens all the time in the U.S. Like this has been going on for a while. Like, to make it out to be something like brand new, and it's an extraordinary thing that only this government is guilty of is.
But it's not. I think, Jimmy, people aren't saying that. Like, I think we're like fully aware there was criticism of Poland for having the Pegasus software. There's been plenty of public and high-profile criticism of countries that have been using Pegasus. This, like, El Salvador, isn't the first time this has been raised.
Yeah. Well, and Peter, I think you actually have a really interesting take here, and it is something that has to be addressed, right? I mean, I do have a different take on it, and my take on the entire situation, I kind of take a step back and look at it from a macro perspective and say, yes, they are doing that. Yes, it is bad, and it has been an authoritarian regime for a very long time. But my take is sometimes these regimes take time to move into a democracy. And if you try to go in and force somebody to become a democracy too early, then could be a little bit of backlash. But if a country is embracing aspects of democracy and freedom, which is Bitcoin, that's a freedom. I think freedom will slowly seep into all aspects of the government, and that's where the change begins.
Well, hold on. El Salvador is a democracy, has been a democracy. And one, I mean, the last four leaders have been pieces of shit, and they've been corrupt and stolen money and fled the government, hid out in Nicaragua. But it was always a democracy. Bukele came in under a democratic vote, but he has now changed the constitution that allows him to serve a second term when previously it was only a single term presidency. So it was always a democracy. And my point I'm trying to make is like, he looks great at the moment. Most populists look great in their first term, sometimes their second term. It's when things go bad and they do end up arresting journalists or shooting protesters that when it becomes an issue. Now, he looks great at the moment. What happens when things go bad? And like, is there a scenario whereby we've embraced this and we've not been objective enough, and we've not been as we haven't used enough don't trust verify, that if things did turn bad in El Salvador, if the regime did become full authoritarian, would we all look back and go, we fucked up here?
I think there's a couple things, if I can jump in here, that I think you're highlighting a really important thing, that just because somebody's into Bitcoin doesn't mean that they're a great person, right? But that's kind of the point of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is for enemies. And the really cool part is, even if an individual is using Bitcoin, the people of El Salvador are benefiting from the freedom aspects of it. So implementing something that gives freedom to people through financial freedom, it doesn't help someone who's wanting to be a dictator at the end of the day. They may think short term it does, maybe they don't understand it, but they're giving those freedoms to their people. So I think I agree with you that like we need to be more objective I'm not a huge fan of Bitcoiners spouting don't trust, verify, but they're constantly trusting because somebody said Bitcoin, so they're our BFF. That's just human nature. We're flawed human beings, right? So I do think that there's something there, but I also sort of agree with Jimmy in the fact that like people who don't like Bitcoin, of course, jump on this. Of course, they're going to use it as a reason why Bitcoin sucks or why Bitcoin's for extremists or why it's for, racist white, alt-right people. Like this is just part of it. And we kind of have to take that with a grain of salt and sort of push back against that. But it is important to be objective. And I will agree that I would say people in the space are not great at that sometimes. I think El Salvador is a huge movement of freedom for its people. But I will say that I have not quite jumped on the everything they do is awesome train. So I'm I kind of sit on the fence on that one. Definitely can see both sides.
And this is sort of like a very typical sort of political kind of attack, at least in my mind. It's that, okay, well, you're a Bitcoiner, so you have to defend every Bitcoiner. No, we don't. The whole point is that we are self-sovereign over our coins. You don't have any, you don't get to choose who gets to be a Bitcoiner. And anyone that, like, there are people on my team that I despise, right? That I think are completely immoral. But there are also people that I really like, and that's okay. You don't have to defend every Bitcoiner and their actions just because they own Bitcoin. We're a very diverse group of people, and we got into it for all sorts of different reasons. But, Bukele likes Bitcoin. Doesn't mean I have to defend every one of his actions. In fact, I'm not his keeper. I have no interest in a lot of that stuff. What I will say, though, is that a lot of the criticisms against Bitcoin are made under that assumption that if you're a Bitcoiner, you have to defend every other Bitcoiner. And I just don't I don't agree with that. I don't think that's true. And, that's my perspective, I guess.
I think the Bitcoin community is just praising El Salvador for what they're doing with Bitcoin, right? They're not, I think we're not really giving them a pass for what else they're doing. And even if we didn't give them a pass for that, it's not like the Bitcoin community can change El Salvador's ways, right? So countries do all sorts of bad things. And because we're focused on El Salvador, because what they're doing with Bitcoin, we notice other things that they're doing, the other bad things they're doing. It doesn't mean that we have to, it's not like we can change it, right? So I think we continue to praise them for what they're doing with Bitcoin. And that's kind of our focus, right? I mean, Peter?
Look. I mean, there's people who go online all day, every day, yelling and screaming at people for creating a shitcoin. They keep quiet about certain things by certain autocratic regimes that lead to the imprisonment of people and murder and other things. So I just think, I don't know. I firstly feel like I'm feeling like I'm stepping back and pulling away from it because I think it, as somebody who's told sometimes like I have the journalistic responsibility, that if I was a journalist looking at the El Salvador situation, there are things that make me a little bit nervous, both as a journalist and a Bitcoiner.
I think it's important to criticize. And I will say that, what was it, 4 months ago or so, that there was some big pushback about the COVID restrictions and mandates that he had in place. That it was, pretty much you needed to have a vaccine passport to get in or have a test or do this or that. And there was a huge pushback of it. And somehow then there was a change in the mandates, right? And those were improved. So I think it's totally good to criticize the bad. And I think people are doing it. Are there people out there that completely ignored bad choices because it's not convenient for them? Yeah. But I would say that it's important to note that the Bitcoin community, one, there is no Bitcoin community, right? Like we're a bunch of individuals that happen to use the same form of money. And as it grows, it will be less important what everybody does as a group, and everybody will make independent decisions. But I do agree, like it should be criticized. Those things need to be criticized. And anyone who's standing for freedom, I think Alex Gladstein makes a really good point of criticizing the bad, but uplifting the good choices. And I think that's a good role model of how to handle it. But I would say that people are doing that, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the things, because we are Bitcoiners, and I agree with you, Justine, once there's mass adoption, we're not going to have this ability anymore. But at the moment, because there are fewer of us than, the half the population of the world, we have that commonality. and we can have conversations with people, right? I mean, if there was something I was doing wrong, I'm sure, you know, Charlie or CJ or Peter or Christy Lee, you know, you guys would come set me aside and point it out, right? As I would do for you. And it's not because we're being critical. It's because we genuinely want to grow this community together and get adoption. I mean, that's one of the things. So I think we have an opportunity as Bitcoiners at this point in time, if there's a country that's adopting it, and there's some things that we're looking at that we're critical of, to have conversations. You know, Peter, you in particular, I mean, you've had audiences, you've been there and you've had audiences there. You probably have probably more of an opportunity than almost anybody else to have a one-on-one conversation and say, hey, there's some things I really like about your regime. There's some things I don't like. Let's talk about that. You know, and that's how you bring about change, finding the commonality and then expressing concerns on some of the things on the fringes.
Yeah, I think the thing, you know, one of the things that I keep thinking about that's happening, it's already happened this year. The other day, Bitcoin Magazine got booted off YouTube, like in the middle of their stream or something like that. So one of the issues, as we're talking about, let's say technology, authoritarianism, whatever, and maybe like tech being a little bit overbearing for some people, tech companies being overbearing for their users, is Bitcoin going to fix deplatforming this year? Are we going to figure out a platform that Bitcoiners can use where we can speak our mind? Because I think a lot of times in the process of taking something, obviously the Bitcoin that's only a couple years old relative to the country, and it's even younger than, let's say, Silicon Valley or something like that, obviously. So we're taking these hugely antagonistic like ideological takes, right? So we're saying, oh, the money is broken. That's very inflammatory to a lot of people. So as we're saying these inflammatory things as Bitcoiners and sort of putting these ideas out there that we want to change this stuff with money, with the way people are paid, with the way people are saving, we're at risk as individuals for having our voices silenced, right? So we have to figure out ways to sort of grow that voice. I think that's the real thing that I'm thinking about as I'm listening to everybody talk about this particular issue, because I'm seeing these instances come up where people are getting booted off Twitter, they're getting booted off, you know, YouTube and stuff like that. And there's not really there's not a really good reason that you have a guy talking about Bitcoin getting booted off YouTube, and then you have, like, let's say some Al-Qaeda Twitter or something like that talking about like murdering a president, and that is still on there, right? So there's these like very weird sort of dualities that we're experiencing. And I guess like so Charlie and Jimmy and Peter, I guess my question for you guys is, have you guys experimented at all with any of these other sort of, let's say, Bitcoin or Lightning level content services and stuff like that? And do you guys see that being something that increases adoption because people sort of gravitate in that direction so that they can feel like they can hold on to something and not be deplatformed?
Let me talk about one thing first. So people getting deplatformed, getting booted off YouTube or Twitter, for the most part, I don't think they're being targeted, right? This just happens to just random people, right? So I used to work for YouTube. This is like 10 years ago, where, I mean, it's automated scripts. You get complaints quite a bit. And then if you like complain about a channel, a lot of users complain and they do it automatically, right? They just boot this channel off. And then because it's a big company, it takes a while for customer service to get to a ticket to figure out if this was a valid banning of a channel. So that's probably what happened to this, and also people who get banned from Twitter. So it's not like they're targeting Bitcoin, but Bitcoin might have some enemies, and the enemies are attacking, and it happens. So I don't think these things are like just targeted, but it's true that it happens, and we want platforms that you don't easily get deplatformed from. So far, I haven't really seen anything that really works that well. There's been a lot of attempts at decentralized Twitter, stuff like that, but it's a network effect, just like Bitcoin, right? It's just the network effect for Twitter is so huge that it's almost impossible for anybody else to come in to overtake it. They have to be much better than what Twitter is doing today and it's hard. Just like for an altcoin to take over Bitcoin, it has to be much better than Bitcoin, right? It can't just be slightly better. It can't just be equal. It has to be much better, and I don't see that happening anytime in our future.
Well, it could even be better and fail just because of network effects. Network effects are so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, have you guys seen anything that could potentially take on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook?
Well, the thing is, like, we're talking about platforms, and if you're competing as a platform, you're never gonna, like, it's gonna be very, very difficult. Although, you know, I am seeing some cracks along like the big tech company like lines and stuff like that. There's a lot of discontent at a lot of these places. A lot of the people are leaving for all kinds of reasons and stuff like that, and it's, you know, like at this point in history, it's like kind of cringy to go to like a big tech company like that at this point as a coder or anything like that, because it's like, yeah, you might get paid a lot, but you're going to be like a cafeteria coder for the rest of your life. Yeah, that's real good. So I think like if you're talking platforms, I really don't think we're going to go in that direction. But if you're talking about running your own server, I think that's the direction that I think Bitcoiners will be going towards. And that's not a platform, right? Like you're not using somebody else's server. A platform is somebody else's server that you are getting access to as a client. Instead, if you're running your own server, running your own services like a Lightning node, we learned this from Bitcoin that, you know, if you're running your own node, then you can check without trusting anybody. You can that's something that you can do. Right now, like most of the internet is centralized around these big tech companies. So most people don't have an email address. They use Gmail, right? Like, or Proton Mail or whatever. Those are all platforms. What needs to happen, I think, for real decentralization is for people to run their own mail servers, right? Like, and this was the original design of the internet, where you would have lots of different mail servers, and, you know, people would get their email delivered that way and so on. That's a lot more work because you have to run your own server, make sure it's maintained and not attacked and all that stuff, and it costs money. But that's the direction that we have to go to. And if you do want something that's going to compete with Twitter, well, it's going to have to be something that's actually like where you're running your own server and putting out your own tweets in some sort of like you know, decentralized way where you're able to like not get deplatformed because there's no platform. And that's I think the direction that we'll eventually get to as people come to recognize just how bad some of these platforms are getting. Because I mean, yeah, a lot of it is sort of like you know, like mistakes in an algorithm or whatever. But try, you know, writing something like ivermectin is a drug that was created in 1995 or something like that on Twitter, and it'll give you a warning, right? Like, and if you mention COVID at all on YouTube, it will give you a warning. If you say anything about the election from 2020, it'll give you a warning. Like that's the sort of thing that really pisses people off. But like transitioning to another platform, whether it's like Gab or Getter or something else, like that's just playing the same game. I think it needs to be a completely different game. And that's not something that's going to be quick. It's probably a 5, 10, 20-year project of people sort of like recognizing, okay, I'd rather be self-sovereign, and, you know, like this is the only way that I'm going to be really like immune to deplatforming, because I'm not on a platform. I have my own. That's the way it's got to be. And I think that's the direction it's going to go, but it's not going to happen this year.
Yeah, and going back to the point of network effects, is that there are plenty of people out there who actually appreciate and like some of the censorship that happens on these platforms. You know, we're a unique bunch here in this room or in Bitcoin, is that we are a little bit more pissed off when we see censorship. And I think the problem in these platforms is they've confused what is moderation and censorship. I personally don't mind a bit of moderation. You know, you go to some of these other platforms and some of the levels of conversation is fucking gross, and I don't want to see it. I don't want to see that shit. And so I think there's a difference between the two. I think they've moved from moderation to censorship, but there's a lot of people who think the censorship is fine. It's like, you know, a lot of people who think that some of the things that are being censored are they're removing misinformation. So it's like we might want another platform. We might think there should be another platform, but there aren't enough people out there willing to move that will create that network effect.
Yeah, and on that note, Peter, kind of like what Jimmy was saying, how much effort are people willing to put in, you know, to learn a new skill? Because running a server on your own is a new skill. Running an app on your own is a new skill. Running these types of things, and if we can integrate that the same way that people are integrating learning how to do a Bitcoin transaction into the sort of common vernacular, I think that it's all sort of coming up at the same time. Like a lot of us, when we were little kids, like, you know, if someone would have shown you an iPhone when you were 3 years old and all that, like from today, and all the things it can do and all the apps it can run and all the photos it can take and the filters on TikTok and all those things, it would have blown people's minds in 1983, that for me, you know. But the way I look at it is that as we age and we get older and we learn new skills, because these skills become essential. And if something is essential to you and it's important to you, you will figure out a way to do it, you know, just like, you know.
There's a shelf life to these things as well. Like there was a time where everyone was on MySpace, and then MySpace sold for nearly $1 billion and no one used it anymore. And if you look at Facebook now, I don't use it really. I don't really know many people who do. Neither of my kids are using it. I plan to use it. Even Instagram or Snapchat has been replaced by TikTok. Like things change. I think just maybe like a different kind of like it may become a time where people just don't want to use Twitter anymore. They're like fed up of it, and it just loses its place in the world. I think that's more likely to happen than somebody go, "Oh, Twitter's censoring people. We need to do a better Twitter." I just think it's more likely just something different comes out that people don't expect, and that would be better.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you know, Facebook is seen as the as social networking for boomers, right? I don't know any kids that have ever been on a Facebook. You know, it's and CJ, to your point, it's funny. I mean, because we all probably watched Back to the Future 2, right? And you had hoverboards and video.
Where's
chats.
my fucking hoverboard?
We are in Back to the Future 2 right now. We're literally talking to each other via video in our houses. It's amazing. And these things are now just commonplace for people. I mean, man, when I was growing up, I remember when we only had 3 channels, right? 3 channels and a phone that was connected to the wall by a cord. And as things move, and they move faster and faster and faster. I mean, remember how long we were all on Facebook or MySpace, and then Facebook, and then these other things have now happened very quickly. So yeah, I think you're right. I think a new platform just comes out that's different, and people, you know, and then the next generation just migrates to it, and everything else is just not cool anymore.
Well, comparing this to Bitcoin, so like running your own mail server or running your own Twitter client or node is similar to like storing your own private keys, right? So if you're really serious about it, you would do that, right, for your own protection. If you're serious about privacy, you'll run your own mail server, right? But it's not for everyone, like you said, CJ, right? It's not everyone can store their own private keys, so they use centralized services, and that's why most people use centralized platforms like Twitter, where with Bitcoin centralized services, you can get hacked, you can lose your coins. With Twitter, they can ban you or censor you, right? It's kind of similar, right? But the thing about open internet and about like decentralized Bitcoin is that you have a choice, right? You can always opt out, and you don't have to use Twitter. We're not in a society or in a country where they force you to use one platform and you have to use that, right? If you don't like Twitter, you get banned from Twitter. If you don't like Reddit or Bitcoin, you got censored there. You can always go to a different platform, right? There's all these other different platforms. They may not have the network effect, but you have a choice. You still have a choice, and that's the beauty of open internet, and that's the beauty of Bitcoin being decentralized. Is you always have a choice to opt out of a centralized service if you want, and if you're able to do it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's why, you know, businesses like Valkyrie and Unchained Capital can work together, right? Because, you know, Valkyrie is a business where people don't want to do anything, right? They don't want to set up their own stuff. They just want to hand you some cash and say, go put this in Bitcoin, right? You know, Unchained Capital, they're like, teaching people how to set up their own things, and they're storing it for them and helping with the security and all that. And then there's people way over here that are just like, no, I'm going to do it all myself. But yeah, there's different levels of people, and or people have different levels, and there's a full spectrum, and that's why all of these different services can all work together in the same ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's really interesting with, like, when you're having conversations with someone that's very new to Bitcoin, they say, oh, what do you do with your Bitcoin? And it's like, well, how many bank accounts do you have? How many credit cards do you have? When people realize how many different layers of exposure they have in the traditional finance sense, then I think they have a really, then you see all those things are actually developing in the Bitcoin stack as well. And I think that's one of the things that's great about Bitcoin is you can mine it, you can store it, you can trade it, you can send it, you can hide it. There's a lot of different things and use cases there, just like regular dollars or whatever. But the one thing that's interesting is like you have people connected because of their ideology through Bitcoin. And even though, like Jimmy said, there's people that are maybe have disparate ethics or disparate morals or something like that, and the reason why they're using Bitcoin is maybe not the same reason why you're using Bitcoin. Freedom is messy, right? And as we're going to see this evolution in the space, there's going to be some messy parts of that where people are going to get, in trouble, or they're going to get ahead of themselves a little bit, or whatever. It just like anything else, just like politics or celebrity or anything else. There's going to be people that throw their hard drives away, and they're searching some dump in London. Peter, like, what's the story with this guy out here that's like still looking for his computer that he threw away? Like,
do you know what? There was a fund who offered to pay the council tens of millions to excavate the dump to go and find that computer. They were willing to fund it, knowing they would take a percentage of the Bitcoin if they found that drive.
Yeah,
Did the dump agree to it?
Like I can't remember the price of Bitcoin the last time the story broke, but the last time the story broke, it was $270 million of Bitcoin.
This story keeps breaking like every few months.
I was gonna say it's like a continuing.
Every few months, this people rehash this story.
Every like family member or friend that I've somehow onboarded to Bitcoin, when it comes back around, will send it to me and be like, Justine, what is this? And I'm like, oh, multi-sig solves that. This is my Bitcoin fixes this. It's like multi-sig fixes this. Don't worry. You're good.
The dude's a Bcasher anyway, I think.
No comment then. No comment.
Yeah, it's fun. It's oh, sorry. I was going to say it's kind of like the Japanese gold in the Philippines. There's always stories about it, and it's been going on since World War II. And people are always going out excavating, looking for the gold that they hid.
Yeah, I agree. Though I think that just like with Bitcoin private keys, I'm a believer that everybody will hold their own keys, because that's a huge value proposition for Bitcoin, and I think that it'll just be easier to do as we go along. As Stephen mentioned, Unchained Capital is trying to help do that as well, where you still have control, but we help you. But I think it's kind of the same with the social media aspect. Like, everybody should be running their own servers. That's the solution. That fixes it. But how do we get everybody there? Because right now, that's kind of tricky for people. So I think it will get easier over time. We see things get easier. I'm still amazed when I look at all the things that technology and our cell phones can do. So I'm still a boomer in that way. But I think that every day things are getting easier, and that's where I see it going as well.
And you need to put some effort into it, right? Like it
freedom
used
comes
to be
with personal responsibility, right?
Yeah, it used to be that people were running their own mail servers if you wanted an email address and stuff like that. But people stopped because these tech companies made it very easy, and they made you the product, right? Like, they started selling your information in order to make up for the fact that they're providing it for free. And most people were okay with that, including myself right now, right? I'm using Gmail or whatever. But there will come a day when, the cost benefit analysis will change. And, like, as you get these tools, like I really want like Umbrel or Start9 to have a mail server option on it, so that, hey, hook up your domain to it, and, we'll handle all of that and add the security patches and stuff. I think that's like reasonable enough where a significant portion of, say, the Bitcoin community can get on board and do stuff like that. And I don't know, maybe you can add like a Lightning gateway so that if you want to log into the server and send some mail for a particular domain, you have to pay a few sats or something like that to prevent spam. There are so many ways in which the actual technology that's there can be improved through sort of like integration of these technologies. It's just that no one's really interested in doing it because no one's really funding it. And it's up to the people that care about liberty, that care about privacy, that care about security to actually like fund some of it, right? Be willing to pay for it. Because if you're getting it for free, then you're probably the product. And if you are the product, well, then they don't really give a rat's ass about you. So, yeah.
Funny, Jimmy, funny that you mentioned email spam, because proof of work was invented to combat email spam. Right? The initial thing was that to send an email, you have to do a small amount of work, so that you can't send millions of emails without doing all that work. So it was actually invented to combat email spam, but it was never used for that.
So, Christy Lee, do you see people co-locating email servers on their off-grid Bitcoin mining rigs soon? Is that something that we could be putting out there?
I mean, it would be a smart business model to adapt ASICs to be capable of more than just being ASICs. Wouldn't cost that much more energy, but I have a different take. I don't think people care enough about decentralization, and I don't think they care enough about self-sovereignty, and I don't think they ever will. I think there's a small subsection of the ecosystem that cares a lot and always has, and that's why we have all these advancements in cryptography and in the technology field, but not enough people really care. There's more problems for them to worry about than, how do I make sure that I am owning my own data? And I don't think that people are going to be incentivized to run their own servers until there's proper financial incentive. So I think if we want to get there, what we have to do is figure out, how do you monetarily incentivize running nodes? How do you incentivize running your own email server? How do you make sure that turns not into a form of mining, but into a kickback loop? And then that's when people will start caring a little bit more, because they're starting to make money from it. And it's going up in their internal queue of, here's why I should care. So, yeah, different take, but...
No,
yeah,
I think this is what Bitcoin fixes, because you have monetary incentives for almost everything. Already, if you're running a Lightning node, you can make fees routing and stuff like that. That's motivation. And if you're running a mail server that charges for every incoming mail, like a few sats or something like that, that's another monetary incentive. Money is the thing that drives all of this stuff. Part of why the web is as messed up and centralized as it is because everything had to go through advertising. That's really how the entire web is funded. But if you have a direct method of payment, it can, the entire market can become a lot more rational, and you can have monetary incentives that work. It's a matter of trying different business models and seeing it. And this is one of the really exciting things about Lightning, is that it does sort of like allow it at a very micro level without needing to set up like payment processors and bank accounts and all this other stuff. You can just sort of do it without anyone's permission. And that's ultimately what's going to get us there, I think. I think everything you said is right, but Bitcoin fixes this, right?
Well, I think exactly, because microtransactions was actually not feasible before Bitcoin and Lightning, right? So back then, when it wasn't feasible, the only way for these sites to monetize is through ads. And that's why we have this ad-based system. But with microtransactions becoming more and more feasible, like Jimmy said, things can actually be fixed by this. We can have different ways of solving this problem.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, it looks like we're getting the hook from our producers, but before we wrap it up, I do want to do two things. Number one, I want to have a quick poll. And if you're comfortable, raise your hand if you're going to be at Bitcoin 2022 in April in Miami. Wow. All right. So I hope to see everybody there. Second of all, I just want to congratulate a lot of the people that have joined us. We all have a lot of people have accomplished some personal things, as long as some business things as well. First of all, I want to congratulate Justine on getting engaged and hopefully not being runaway bride this year and getting married.
It's happening. It's happening.
I want to congratulate Chairman Peter McCormick for buying a football team and driving them to the Premier Leagues. Congratulations, Peter.
Thank you.
Jimmy and CJ, congratulations on your book. I can't wait to read it. And then Charlie and Christy Lee, congratulations on getting back into the game and building and coding and leading teams of developers again. And continuing to build our ecosystem. So congratulations, everybody. I think it's going to be a fantastic year. And CJ, do you want to sign us off?
All right. Well, that was a really fun live stream from everybody on. Appreciate everybody joining, and all the opinions are not financial advice. This is very important. Also, socially.
Bollocks.
What's that?
Financial advice, buy Bitcoin. Bollocks to you.
And then
and buy football clubs.
Buy football clubs.
Yeah.
Math advice.
If everybody could just go really quick and just say where we can follow you, Justine.
I'm on Twitter, Miss Hodl, MSHODL.
Okay, thank you. And then Christy Lee.
Twitter, oh god, a girl.
There you go. Peter.
Twitter, Peter McCormack.
And then Peter, where are your football clubs on Twitter as well, right?
Yeah, Real Bedford, REAL Bedford.
All right. Charlie?
Yeah, I'm Satoshi Light on Twitter.
Okay. Jimmy?
I am Jimmy Song on Twitter.
All right. And I am signing us out. Thank you for joining, everybody. This has been another episode of the Bitcoin Bottom Line.